That's really crazy. Donald Trump wants to pump up the entire stock market and Bitcoin. He's issuing a warning to the Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. He needs to lower the interest rates. This is hardcore, and we need to look at what's behind it, why Donald Trump is so eager to bring down interest rates right now. We all know that more liquidity and lower interest rates can be really good for Bitcoin. I mentioned it in the video this morning that the threats Jerome Powell made against Donald Trump during yesterday's Fed meeting could really trigger a massive backlash. And now we see the backlash. Donald Trump is launching a very aggressive attack on Jerome Powell. But not just on him, he's calling on all central banks and countries around the world to lower their interest rates. He already announced that in Davos. Let's take another look at what he already said. And then we have an attack from the International Monetary Fund against the US. The US wants to buy Bitcoin. And now the International Monetary Fund is coming in and says, no, you can't do that. Just like El Salvador is being threatened. The US is now being threatened by the International Monetary Fund as well. This is absolutely crazy. What's going on here, folks? And then we have Hines, the crypto advisor here for Donald Trump, in a new speech, again says that the US wants to buy unlimited Bitcoin. And he's touching on a few other details. That the US is really on the verge of buying Bitcoin and a lot more. We'll take a look at that too, because it's really that crazy. On the one hand, the warning from the International Monetary Fund. On the other hand, it says here, D.O. Hines, no, we want unlimited Bitcoin. But first, let's start with the threats from Donald Trump towards Jerome Powell. I already mentioned this in the video this morning because yesterday was the Fed meeting. Jerome Powell said something like, yeah, there's inflation now, and we're not quite sure how much the tariffs have to do with it, but a decent part. The tariffs will probably have to take some responsibility for the fact that inflation is rising now. And Donald Trump doesn't like that because Donald Trump assumes that on the 2nd, April will be a sort of liberation day. I've said this in other videos too. The 2nd, April is going to be a really crucial date because on April 2nd is when the retaliatory tariffs go into effect. And Donald Trump sees that as Liberation Day. And now Jerome Powell suddenly says, yeah, the tariffs, they could be inflationary. And Donald Trump doesn't see it that way at all. I mean, that makes total sense, that the tariffs are inflationary. What is Donald Trump thinking? So it's pretty clear that tariffs always have an inflationary effect. But Donald Trump doesn't like to hear that. Donald Trump is saying right here on Truth Social that the Fed would be much better off lowering interest rates since the US tariffs are slowly and gradually flowing into the economy. Do the right thing. The 2nd, April is Liberation Day in America. So, that's clearly to be seen as a threat. Feel free to write in the comments how you see it. But he clearly says here, do the right thing. And it's not the first time that Donald Trump has been angry with Jerome Powell. But Jerome Powell has already been asked at a FAT meeting whether he is being influenced by Donald Trump, whether he would resign if Donald Trump said, hey, he is not happy with Jerome Powell. And then Jerome Powell says quite clearly, no, he would not resign, even if this were Donald Trump. Would support that, because Donald Trump can't just kick Jerome Powell out like that. I checked that out. He can't just kick him out like that, because the Federal Reserve, the central bank of the US, still has a certain level of independence. On the other hand, I can also understand Donald Trump because we really need to grasp what's behind this war, or this conflict. So, we really have a war now. Donald Trump against the central banks of the US. So Donald Trump is also saying that he wants to audit the Federal Reserve. Elon Musk even says that we should abolish the Federal Reserve. Donald Trump hasn't gone that far yet, but we have to understand that the US is in a dilemma here. That means there are $9 trillion in debt that needs to be refinanced this year. So, we need follow-up loans and much more. And if the interest rates are too high right now, then this refinancing is going to be way too expensive. And that's why Donald Trump's current plan is to crash the economy to force the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates. Donald Trump has already done part of that. We've seen Bitcoin sell off. The stock markets have dropped too, because there's just so much uncertainty with all the tariff issues. So, Donald Trump is bringing in the uncertainty, and the market is selling off. The Federal Reserve should really be doing its job right now, and stimulate the economy here when things aren't going so well for it. Additionally, the Department of Government Efficiency wants to cut 2 million jobs, which is really a sign for the central banks because in the USA, the mandate of the central banks is also to ensure employment here. If there's more unemployment now, that would be another reason for Jerome Powell to lower the interest rates. This means that Donald Trump is trying everything to bring interest rates down here. Jerome Powell didn't lower the rates at the meeting yesterday. I mean, that was to be expected, but Donald Trump is still pissed off and said, how can it be that he isn't lowering the rates now? And then he's now laying down the law and clearly says, do the right thing. So, from my perspective, that's a pretty clear threat here. I mean, that's good for Bitcoin. It would be good for the stock markets if the interest rates go down. That has to be clearly affirmed. That would be awesome. And we've heard time and again that Donald Trump identifies with the stock markets, even with the Bitcoin price, seeing it as an indicator of his success as president. When the stock markets and Bitcoin go up, he takes that as a win. That's why he definitely has an interest in being the president who pumped up the stock markets and the economy and so on. But we shouldn't forget that all of this comes with a certain level of risk. So Jerome Powell definitely has some justification for not lowering the rates because we have tariffs that are just inflationary. You can't deny that. And if now, the inflation that isn't really under control yet. What we heard yesterday at the Fed meeting, Jerome Powell mentioned the word stagflation. If we enter stagflationary phases and then just lower the interest rates, it could really cause inflation to spiral out of control. There was actually a very interesting take under a tweet from Donald Trump by some random guy. This random dude wrote that the last time tariffs and loose money came together, it led to stagflation in the 1970s. Nixon imposed tariffs while simultaneously pressuring the Fed to lower interest rates. The result was rampant inflation, a weak dollar, and a decades-long economic crisis, and nobody in his administration dealt with that. So this is a warning to Donald Trump, clearly saying, hey, this could work out if you lower the rates. And in the short term, that might work. But long term, it could lead to a crash and maybe even long-term stagflation. I mean, maybe you can stimulate the economy with the new money and low interest rates for now. But that's not guaranteed. Absolutely. So we need to weigh what's good for the economy and what's good for the stock markets. All the Bitcoin and the stock markets are celebrating when Donald Trump lowers the interest rates. In general, the people here who say, okay, we have to look at this long term, Jerome Powell. When you say, okay, we want monetary stability and all that, they tend to view it a bit critically. And now we need to look at what Donald Trump said back then in Davos, which I think was, well, how long ago? About a quarter of a year or so? What he said back then. And he gave exactly the same warning, but not to Jerome Powell, rather to all, the international central banks.
America is back and open for business. I'm also going to ask Saudi Arabia and OPEC to bring down the cost of oil. I'll demand that interest rates drop immediately, and likewise, they should be dropping all over the world.
You can clearly see here that the plan has been set for a long time. Hear from Donald Trump. He's been on this for a long time, wanting to bring down the interest rates. And I'm also curious to see if he might throw some other warnings at other central banks. I mean, a lot of central banks are just waiting for Donald Trump to lower the interest rates. It's coming out. China, for example, is facing massive problems in their economy. They would love to lower their interest rates, but they can't do it right now because the rates here in the US are still too high, and otherwise, the interest spread would be too wide. So they're basically just waiting for Donald Trump or Jerome Powell to lower the interest rates. Then China will also lower their interest rates, and there will be even more stimulus to bring it into the market, and that will fully fuel the risk-on mode here and push Bitcoin and all risk assets forward. Especially because it means that when the Fed lowers the rates, other central banks around the world will follow suit. And then we actually need to take a look at this. I was really shocked this morning when I woke up. So for you guys, it would already be noon. But it actually says here that the board of the International Monetary Fund has warned Trump not to add any more Bitcoins to the U.S. Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, as it poses a risk to the volatility and stability of the U.S. economy. And I find this to be a really shocking revelation because we saw the same warning with El Salvador. Many people said, wow, Bukele has really fallen hard, and what he did is really bad. Now he's gotten into a deal with the International Monetary Fund. Admitted in Bukele is dependent on the International Monetary Fund because Bukele needs the money. I mean, we are in a third world country here. I am actually here in El Salvador. But Donald Trump doesn't necessarily need the money. That's why I'm curious to see whether Donald Trump will agree to a deal or something like that. I thought it was cool. Bukele agreed to a deal here. From the International Monetary Fund, he's taken all the money but is still buying normally. Bitcoin continues, which means Bukele has made it clear, hey, even if things are tough here, the contract states that you can't buy any more Bitcoins. Bukele, he's buying 1 Bitcoin every day, 1 Bitcoin, and sometimes he's even bought more than 1 Bitcoin, and I really find that to be a strong sign. It's a strong sign that on one hand, he's getting involved with the International Monetary Fund, but on the other hand, he's also making it very clear, saying, this far and no further. The Bitcoin strategy won't be cancelled, come what may, but we're buying 1 Bitcoin every day. I think a similar scenario will also be the case in the US. I mean, the US isn't necessarily dependent on the International Monetary Fund. In a third world country, I get that you might let yourself be blackmailed, but yeah, it's definitely interesting to see how all of this is coming together. I mean, we still need to see who actually set all this in motion. This whole thing comes from Max Keiser. I think he spread all those rumors. So, I don't know if this is just a rumor or if it's been officially confirmed. Here, Max Keiser says that the board of the International Monetary Fund has warned Trump. Here, if he adds Bitcoin, then it means here, volatility and stability risks. And there were a lot of people who were were disturbed and commented, hey, what's up with the International Monetary Fund? The funny thing about the whole story is that Hines, the crypto advisor for Donald Trump, it felt like maybe 2 or 3 hours before this, released an interview where he clearly states again that the US wants to buy unlimited Bitcoin. Let's take another look at that. And here, let's dive into a few details that are also new. And what's interesting here is the whole Bitcoin strategy in the US. So it seems like they don't really care. Or maybe the warning hasn't even reached them yet. But Hines definitely made some very strong statements here.
Strategy CEO Michael Saylor is suggesting that the US acquire up to 25% of the Bitcoin supply by 2035. What would be the target amount for the United States in your view?
Well, I get asked this question a lot, and I think the answer to that, like I said at the summit yesterday, is as much as we can possibly get, so long as it's in budget neutral ways that don't cost the taxpayer a dime. I think we have a lot of high IQ people in the building that are working on this, and folks over at the Treasury office and folks over at Commerce, working with the internal working group that was set up in the first digital assets EO. We'll be able to come up with ways to accumulate more really over the course of the next few years and beyond that. I mean, look, we view Bitcoin as being digital gold. That's why we set up the strategic Bitcoin reserve in the way that we did, right? Bitcoin is a commodity. It's not a security. As our AI and cryptos are, David Sachs likes to say, it has the immaculate conception, meaning that there's no issuer. It has intrinsic stored value that's traditionally accepted. And we feel like it's in the best interest of Americans to hold on to this asset long term and accumulate as much as we can get. That's why we've akin this to digital gold and talked about building the digital Fort Knox for the United States. And, you mentioned the Bitcoin that we have possession of. We've actually been in possession of nearly 400,000 Bitcoin. We sold roughly half of that prematurely at about, I think it was close to $370 million is what we sold it for. If we would have held on to that, it would have been worth $17 billion today. I mean, it just goes to show you how important this asset is and what we can do with it to benefit the American people. One thing that I've said repeatedly throughout the media circuit is that I think it's really nice that we have a president that's actually looking to accumulate assets for Americans rather than take it away, unlike the last regime that we had here at the White House. But we feel very confident about our plan. We feel confident about the internal working group that was set up in that first EO, and I think we're going to have tremendous ideas on how to accomplish this.
Then he also says, very, very importantly, this is a new statement. You will definitely find ways to accumulate Bitcoin here. Oh, look, here comes my cat.
Check this out. Important, brutal Bitcoin cat.
She's just chilling here and wants something to eat. Make sure to drop a like for the Bitcoin cat. Then, here, we're definitely going to buy more Bitcoin, he says. That's already a pretty significant sign. He says here, Bitcoin is digital gold. He said that last time too. It doesn't have a publisher. That's also a new statement. It's in the best interest of Americans to hold and accumulate it. And that's just crazy when you think about it. That means other countries are considering this. Germany is selling Bitcoin and so on. And the USA is actually saying, hey, we not only need to buy Bitcoin, but it's in the best interest of the US population to buy and hold Bitcoin. So that's quite a statement that just came out. Then he says we need to build some kind of Fort Knox here. He's also talking about the sales. He says it's just dumb to make all these sales, that the USA has lost a lot of money. And now please come here. We should be holding on to it and not just giving away prosperity like this. I mean, shout out to Saxony, who also sold their Bitcoin. I think it's really, really exciting what's going on right now. Feel free to write in the comments below how you see the whole thing. Is it over the top for Donald Trump to attack the central banks, or can you go along with that? I'm going to put a link down below for you to 21 Bitcoin, how you can easily, safely, and simply buy Bitcoin. Here, with the code, you can still get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. Guys, catch you later. Peace out.